Houston.
The appointed time of 5:30 has arrived. Now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Director McCarty?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the mayor wanted to make a statement before I began. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to the City Council and the departments for all their hard work, and to the general public. Last year, as everybody knows, we were in a tough financial situation since we had a double downturn on sales tax revenue. To our knowledge, it's been the first time ever. And this council made the tough decisions, as we have been since we came into the office in 2015, and making the right moves to really look after the financial stability of our city, not only today, but for the future. And that's one thing I really appreciate. We don't kick the can down the road. We take the important actions to address the long-term needs of our city. And it's thanks to everybody working together that we came to this point, which Director McCarty will cover, and then each department will go through. But appreciate everybody's insights. Sometimes we don't agree, and that's what it's all about. We come to the best solutions when we do challenge each other to make a determination on what's the right way to go with our community. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'll proceed if you're okay with that. I'll take that.
Budget hearing.
I'll take that as a yes. I understand. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the time to start this evening, kick off the budget hearings. We've done this many times, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to do so, just to provide a broad overview of what you're going to be hearing over the next few weeks as we go through each of the departmental hearings. And before I get started, I do have to thank some people who really work hard every year to make this a reality, make this happen. Staff that I have are excellent, and I wouldn't trade them for anybody, and certainly they do a very good job, and we wouldn't be where we were without them. So to my left, we have Julie Zolgadar. You all know she's been here for a while as the budget manager. Dallas Whitford on my right, who came back out of retirement. Thank you, Dallas, to help us a little bit on getting things prepared. He's also helping us train the next generation of revenue staff. One of those I think is here, although I didn't see him. Jeff there. Jeff Blazes in the back was the library fiscal officer, still is, but as part of our shared services initiative, he's actually also overseeing OBM fiscal and taking on some of Dallas's revenue roles. The other individual who's been helping us and taking on and training in those roles, Courtney Heinzel, isn't here tonight. She had a child care issue and was unable to attend, but she hopefully will be at the OBM presentation. And then we also have in the back corner a couple of new budget analysts. We have Bianca Sanchez. Bianca, you want to raise your hand? And we have Mallory Branham. Mallory, you back there? Those are our two new budget analysts that work with Julie. So all of them have done a great job in putting this budget together and putting this presentation together. So thank you, everyone. And with that, we will get started. So the first thing we want to do is talk about where we expect to end in fiscal year 19 and talk about where we are, how we got there, what are some of the factors that are involved. As you know, the last couple of years we had a couple of very difficult budget years that we had to work through, and the mayor alluded to it earlier. The two driving forces of that we'll get to towards the end of the presentation because they'll continue to be problematic going into the future. But of course, we've talked about it many times, the sales tax and police and fire pension obligations. But having said that, these are those metrics we're always talking about: end of year cash, average daily cash balance, fund balance. All of that's in here from fiscal year 12 to our expected fiscal year 19. And I'll just point out two things. I'm not going to read every number on this chart, but I want to point your attention to the average daily cash balance, which is projected to end up around $6 million. The reason that that's noteworthy in my mind is if you look at the history, it actually stayed flat. It didn't go up, unfortunately, but at least it stayed flat, because you look at the two previous years and that metric dropped by $1 million a year over 2 years. And that's significant. So we're talking about the average amount of cash on hand in the bank on a daily basis. So that is a significant number. And as I've talked about in the past, that's one of those things that raises a bit of a red flag that you might have some fiscal issues that you've got to deal with. And of course, we've been dealing with those for the last couple of years.
Director McCarty, not to interrupt you, but is there some kind of buzzing, or is it just me?
You guys hear a buzz?
It's
Is it this mic maybe, or?
yeah, it's an echo and a buzzing, and it's just.
Mike, what do you want us to do? Do you?
Try to use.
You're gonna have to ask Tony.
Just the microphone's under the speaker, she gets the feedback.
Oh, right there? So what do you suggest?
Pull back, come back.
Go backwards?
Pull the mic closer to you.
This is budget hearings on the fly right here.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you're pointing it out because I can't hear it. Is that better?
Right now, yes.
Right now? As long as I stay perfectly still. Dallas, you're going to need to flip my pages for me. Okay, let's
Mr.
try
Clerk,
it.
while
Please.
we're just doing that,
Thank
let
you.
the record reflect that I came a couple of minutes late. Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Better? Please let me know if it's an issue. We can move back a little further. So we were talking about average daily cash balance, and I think we got through that. The other thing I wanted to point out, if you look at this, unfortunately, is that we had had a really nice run of building the budget and liquidity back up, and there had been a number of years that we were able to go without any days of a negative balance, and unfortunately that came to an end this year. Early in the year, when liquidity was a little lower, we had, looks like 6 days of negative cash. But I don't think we've had anything since then, and things have gotten better due to some of the things we're about to talk about. And the other thing on this page, the last thing I'll bring to your attention is the fund balance. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about fund balance over the last couple of years and where it was projected to go. In fact, the budget that was passed last year projected for it to decrease to around, I want to say 13, 14%, somewhere in that ballpark. But because of the performance, the fiscal performance of this year, we're actually looking at going up. In fact, the fiscal year 19 right now is projected to end with somewhere in the neighborhood of a $4 to $4.5 million surplus, which will increase our fund balance to over $20 million for only the second time that's ever occurred. It will give us, in terms of percentage, the second highest percentage of fund balance at 17.3% versus that 17.9, which was the highest just a few years ago, in fiscal year 16, before we started seeing that downturn in sales taxes. So how did we, there's a slide missing. Okay, where's my closer? Where's that? I don't know. Okay, well, there's a slide missing that you're not going to see, and it's the one that talks about the revenue. I'll just have to explain. You all have it in your presentations. Unfortunately, it's not appearing on the screen. But what I'll talk about here is, you know, the other day, Alderman Hanauer, who's not here, unfortunately, mentioned something about a Christmas miracle related to equipment. I wouldn't say that was a Christmas miracle. This is closer to a Christmas miracle. This revenue came in about $3.5 million more than projected, and it's significant, especially when looking at sales taxes, which are performing a little over $1 million more than originally planned. And when you've seen 2 years of decline in sales tax, which is our single biggest revenue source, that's significant, and that's something that's worth noting, and we're hoping to continue to see a rebound in that, but as you'll see later in the presentation, it's not something that we can guarantee, and we'll show you a graph that illustrates that. Property taxes, we had a little over $500,000 more in that, because quite frankly, the late annexations that were done came on board a year earlier than we anticipated. Everything moved more quickly than we thought would happen with that. And then there were some miscellaneous things in here. And of course, we've talked about the one-time infusion of nearly $1 million from the settlement of the Comcast fee. That was not planned last year in the budget. We couldn't plan it last year in the budget. This had been ongoing since 2011, 2012 when it started. So there was no way for us to predict that that was actually going to come in this year. It did, and that helped bolster the bottom line. And in fact, I talked about a $4 to $4.5 million surplus this year. $3.5 million of that's from unanticipated revenue. One other thing I'll point out is the state did decide, when it passed its last fiscal budget, that it would take less of our income taxes and less of our sales taxes through that administrative fee than what they had the year before. So certainly that helped a little bit as well. So that's on the revenue side of things, but let's talk about the expense side. The other aspect, and this has been ongoing for a number of years, would be cost control measures. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about 4 of those and where that has put us, because I think it puts into context the efforts of the city administration and the city council, not just the last year, not just the last 2 years, but the last 10 years, the things that have happened since the Great Recession. That is how we've been able to weather the storm. That is how we've been successful in trying to keep that fund balance up, try and bolster our liquidity, even in the face of some daunting challenges when we get into, again, pension and sales taxes that we'll talk about. So it all starts with personnel. In our corporate fund, personnel is 80% of the budget. If you're going to make meaningful reductions somewhere, it has to revolve around personnel, because that is obviously the majority of it. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything. So we have all been focused on personnel reductions for a number of years. And if you look, say, since FY 2012, we've reduced positions by 116. Now, to put that in budgetary terms, based on our average salary and benefits, which is around 80 or 85,000, you're talking about savings of $9 million. That's not $9 million in savings over that time period. That is in today's dollars, next year's budget, $9 million in annual savings. That's significant. If you look at just the corporate fund, going back to the high level of 2006, which was the highest corporate fund headcount that I think the city has ever had, we now have 165 fewer budgeted positions. Again, in annual real terms, that's roughly $13 million in annual savings that we have generated that are not in next year's budget because of those cost control measures. Once you have your personnel reductions in place, the next place you need to look is salary growth. You have to have employees in order to provide city services to the citizens of this community. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things that you can look at doing is what does the annual salary growth mean in terms of its impact on your budget? And if you look back in around 2007, 2008, 2009, the annual increases that were provided back then were 4.03% on a compounded basis. So when you look at the impact of that and you think about the magnitude of the salary base that we have, what that translated to in just one contract for police and fire, for the most part, over 4 years, it added $5.5 million to the base of our corporate fund budget. That's one of those things that you simply can't afford to do year after year, and we recognize that after looking at personnel growth. We've been looking at what kind of increases can the city afford, what's appropriate, and of course we started with CPI as a base and used that as sort of a guide, and ever since then you can see the rather substantial drop in the annual growth rates to the point where the last several years it's been sub 2%. Now, to put that into context, we have a salary base, our 1102 lines essentially, of around $54 million in the corporate fund. So 1%, just 1%, which is below a cost of living adjustment, which is below CPI, is $540,000 increase each and every year. And it's building blocks that build on each other year after year after year. So the impact of reducing the wages that had been provided, the 4%, down to the levels that we've done, just in police and fire alone, has resulted in savings, annual savings of around $5 million. So $5 million plus you tack on the other $9 million or so, I mean, you're around $15 million in annual savings so far. So certainly a significant impact, because when it comes to our budget and the impact, it all revolves around personal services. Workers' compensation. Back in around 2010 or so, the city, for about 2 or 3 years straight, had roughly $4.5 to $5 million in annual workers' compensation insurance. One of the things that we've really worked hard to mitigate is the cost of workers' compensation, and a plan was put in place, and all of the departments have done a good job of implementing that plan, and Corporation Counsel's office has done a good job of adhering to that plan as well in terms of some of the things that are in there with negotiations and that type of thing. In the end, we're now looking at spending around $1.5 to $2 million a year, saving roughly $3 million a year, and we've accomplished that over the last 3-4 years and beyond, back to around, I think, 2012 or 13 is when we started to see the decline. And finally, the other big cost center, healthcare. We've talked about healthcare at the mid-year report. I know that I think Alderman Mangement had a special interest in that and asked us to include some information, and we did. And if you look at, just to put this in context, the kind of job that the Joint Labor and Healthcare Management Committee has done, and they've done a tremendous job, the folks that serve on that committee, in trying to control and mitigate costs with all of the innovative ideas that they've put into place. We're looking at ending fiscal year 19 with around $30 million, $30.6 million. And so I went back and I pulled up that chart that I provided to everyone in the October presentation, the mid-year report. And what that chart essentially was, I didn't include it here, but essentially that chart was the annual increase of large employer healthcare plans over the years. So I took those increases and started with our 2011 number of $20.97 million, and I applied those increases each and every year, starting from that point. And the end result was that while we're looking at spending $30.6 million in FY19, had our healthcare plan grew at the same levels of the national average of those other plans, we'd actually be spending about $5 million more. So we're saving $5 million a year in healthcare costs versus the national average of large group healthcare plans. So when you add those four things, just those four cost centers that we talked about, the work of the City Council, the administration, the department heads, the healthcare committee, all of those together, you'll come up with annual savings in excess of $20 million across the entire city budget, which is certainly not insignificant, and is a testament to everybody working together to try and mitigate the effects of rising pension costs and declines in our biggest revenue source in terms of sales tax, and some of the things that the state has done over the last few years, which have adversely impacted us. It's certainly been a group effort, and it has paid off. And beyond that, I mean, there are things that I didn't mention. I didn't mention the Mayor's Shared Services Initiative that he started in the last couple of years, or our consolidations, the elimination of pension spiking that we've all been working on for a number of years. All of that saves millions of dollars as well. So certainly there has been some revenue to help bolster the downturn and the impact of pensions and some of the other adversities that we've run against. But by and large, we can demonstrate without a doubt that the lion's share of the way that we've dealt with this is through cost control measures, through cuts, through personnel reductions, and other things that we put in place to control those costs. It's been the preferred way of the administration of the City Council for a while, and certainly we have the information to show that that is in fact a reality. So what is all?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Here about revenue, since I know we're going to move on to comparing our rates to other cities. The quarter percent sales tax, home rule sales tax that was added, how much did that generate?
Last year or this year? Let's see, we would have
fiscal
had
year.
about 6, 7 months. Yeah, it's 4.4 annually, so it's a prorated amount from July, so that would have been 4 months. It's about 2/3. Yeah, maybe 2.7, 2.9.
So we're finishing the year at 4.5 million. So roughly, let's just say half of that was from that new source of revenue.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair,
and we'll be talking about that as we go along.
Bill, could you go back to the slide on collectively bargained cost of living adjustments?
Sure.
Regarding healthcare?
Healthcare or collectively bargained cost of living? Which slide did you want?
Excuse me, healthcare costs.
Healthcare?
Excuse me, yeah.
Okay.
So don't take this the wrong way, but, you know, I'm going to be kind of, there's lies, big lies, and there's statistics.
I prefer statistics.
So on this one here, on the healthcare costs, so you've got a base year of our healthcare costs when we had 300 more employees than your ending base year. And then we try to take credit for reduced healthcare costs. Well, of course we're going to have fewer healthcare costs if we have, the rise will be mitigated if we have 300 fewer employees and their families and so forth. So we just got to be careful with the way we present the information so that we don't take credit where complete credit isn't due.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, these certainly, there is some interplay between all of these things together, but one of the other things is we talk about budgeted headcount versus actual on-board headcount. So you have to take that in. For instance, our budgeted headcount this year is what, 1499 or something in that ballpark, but our on-board is roughly 80 less than that or 90 less than that right now. I mean, it's just the ebb and flow of the way it works. So certainly we'd have to take that into account. So we're just looking at averages over time and what it works out to. But your point, I understand. So where do all these efforts leave us from a tax perspective? Well, you know, despite the adversities that we have encountered over time, the efforts of everyone involved are getting us to a point where we are still, even with the sales tax increase last year and some of the other things that we've done, we're still the lowest tax community of all of our comparable cities. You can go through this list and see, and I'm certainly not going to read off anything, but, and we'll talk about property taxes in a moment, but just look at some of the taxes we don't even have: the dining tax, liquor tax, the utility natural gas tax, the municipal motor fuel or gas tax. We don't have any of those taxes. And we're pretty darn competitive with everybody else in most of the other areas except in property taxes. Where's that slide now?
But Director, we're at 8.7%, and with the school district adding their portion to the sales tax, we're still over 10%. Right?
It'll be it'll be when it gets added in July, it'll be 9.75.
Okay.
It won't be over 10.
Mr. Chairman. I think you're referring just to the 1% countywide sales tax that's going for schools. It recently passed, will take us to 9.75. But I think the news reported that the school board is considering another 1/4% or something on top of that here again. So, I mean, we could honestly be looking at a 10%.
Yeah, that's news to me. I hadn't heard that.
I saw something about a week ago, and it's been brought to my attention by a constituent that there is a 1/4% that's been brought up potentially for the school.
And well, the 1% itself and then the 1/4%, certainly from a perspective of what we've been facing over the last few years with the, you know, the flight to e-commerce and all that, certainly that could exacerbate that. That's one of the things that we're concerned about, is that that might actually accelerate the departure to e-commerce that's already in play right now anyway.
As a follow-up on that, you and I discussed the other evening that one of our taxes does have a sunset on it, but it's still a few years away. It's the 0.5% infrastructure sales tax that went in place 2008. Is that correct?
No, that was the one that went in place in 2013 for the big $90 million infrastructure. 0.5% was increased to pay for the bonds. When those bonds are paid off in 2031, 1/4 of that will sunset.
See, I thought the one that we did under the Davlin administration was the one that had the sunset on it.
It did.
No.
Reenacted by the council.
Okay. So we do have one that has a sunset, but it's at least 10 years away then.
Yes, it's 12, 13 years away. Because I think it's in calendar year 2031, isn't it? So probably fiscal year 32.
Okay.
So we were talking about comparable tax rates. So I think we did this last year as well. If you were to take a bundle of goods and say we're just going to spend $100 on each of these areas, what does that mean for Springfield compared to others? So the tax rates work out to about $21.75 in taxes for our citizens, which if you look across the same thing in the other cities, we're the next closest I think is almost $30, and the rest are above $30. So certainly from a tax perspective, our citizens enjoy lower taxes, quite a bit lower taxes in some of these areas versus you know, Decatur, Bloomington, Normal, etc. So certainly good news. Property taxes, we can talk about those by ourselves. So if you're a citizen in this community and you have a $150,000 home, your property tax for the city of Springfield is $469. That same $150,000 home in Peoria, Normal, Decatur, and everywhere else will cost you at least about $200 more in taxes to those communities. And in some case, Decatur, for instance, it's not quite double, but it's approaching double. So our property taxes, again, are quite a bit lower. And that's the reason, obviously, is our rate. Our rate is 93.85 cents. It's been that way for roughly 30 years while everybody else has been increasing their rates. And you can see those in the yellow on the bottom of this slide. So what does that mean? I asked the staff to take those rates in other communities and apply them to the Springfield tax base just to see what it would look like. And you can see here Springfield on the right and it growing, going from right to left all the way up to Decatur. So we're expecting about $22.8 million in property taxes next year. If we had Champaign's rate, we'd be somewhere north of $30 million. Well, in fact, if we had any of the other rates, we'd be north of $30 million. And if we had Decatur's rate, we'd be over $40 million. And all of the discussions and the difficulties that have been had over the last years, they wouldn't have happened. But we don't have that because city leaders over time have made a commitment, have decided that the property tax needed to stay low for our citizens, and that rather than to increase the tax on just our citizens, they would rather increase the taxes that everybody pays, specifically sales tax. Sales tax, we'll get into that, is our biggest tax, almost half the budget. And in doing so, that's worked very well. I mean, that's not just our citizens, it's the people who work here, who live elsewhere, the people who visit here, the people who come down during legislative sessions, all share in that tax burden and helping provide services to our citizens. And it's worked very, very well up to this point, up until the point where sales tax started to stagnate and decline, and that's where it became a problem. And we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. But before I get to that, let's talk about the mayor's fiscal year 2020 introduced budget. All funds budget request, revenue expectation is $547.7 million. Most of that, or at least a good chunk of it, would be enterprise funds from the utility, electric, and water. We won't get into details because you'll be hearing about that stuff in the department budgets. The expenses, $546.3 million expected, all funds. 34% of that personal services, which you will see is quite a difference when you look at just the corporate fund. And speaking of which, corporate fund revenue, we're expecting $125.8 million in revenue, most of it in the form of local taxes, which are comprised mainly of sales and property taxes. The sales tax expectation is about $59 million, which accounts for roughly 47% of our corporate fund budget. And that's what we've talked about in the past, and we reiterate all the time, is that it's great that this has worked so well for so long, but the volatility, the recent volatility and decline of sales tax certainly is something that we'll need to be cognizant of and continue to pay attention to. As you'll see in a little bit, we are getting a bit of a rebound after 2 years of decline, which is a great thing, but it's still not where it should be had it continued at levels in previous years.
So could you explain to me the difference between the home rule sales tax? Oh, never mind, I see that, okay.
Good? Okay. I can go, maybe I'll just explain it for the public anyway. You have your home rule and your local sales tax. So the total sales tax rate of 8.75, the first 6.25 is the state sales tax. Anything above that is what is considered our local sales tax. So that's the differential. We've just got them split them out there so that you could see that. Where are we on expenses now? Okay, so expenses expected are $125.79 million. What that means when you compare it to the revenue expectation is a surplus budget, about a $60,000 surplus revenue over expenses in the budget. And that does not include, there are no service cuts, there are no tax increases, and we did not include a $1 million transfer for Fund 95 again this year. None of that is in there. It's a balanced budget without any of that.
So is there revenues from the fund balance going into this budget?
There is no fund balance either. I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. That's a good point, Alderman. Thank you. There is no fund balance either. It's a completely balanced budget with none of those items. So what does the expense consist of? Where's the growth? Well, there's only a 0.9% growth in personal services, and we talked about earlier, and you saw in the previous pie chart, personal services is 80% of the budget. It's the single largest piece by far, and yet we're only looking at a 0.9% increase, or less than $1 million, about $895,000. We're looking at about $1 million in other operating lines, or 5.93%, but bear in mind that half of that is attributable to the first year of the 3-year plan, implementation plan for replacing the police radios that are now becoming obsolete. So it'll be $500,000 a year for the next 3 years to replace those at a total cost of $1.5 million. So that accounts for half of that increase. And there are some other things in there, like the other police equipment, ballistic helmets, so on and so forth. Am I forgetting anything major? Oh, the shot spotter program is in there as well. So that's, I mean, the majority of that growth, virtually all of it, is in those items that we just talked about. In terms of personal services, actually the salary and fringe line is down by $30,000, not up. Our health insurance is up a negligible, in terms of health insurance, $185,000 or 1.6%. Again, as we've talked about in the past, the national average has been around 5 or 6% over the last, say, half decade or so. The big increase, to no one surprise, I'm sure, would be in police and fire, where we're looking at a $592,000 increase in fire and $150,000 increase in the police pension obligations for next year. All in all, it's adds up to that $895,000 0.9% increase in expenses. I'm not going to go over everything. You all got these overviews handed out, and I believe they're available online. I bore you with reading all of them. But I will highlight a couple of the big items. Obviously, we've talked about the $4.3 million equipment replacement program that's being proposed. That's for police, fire, and public works. I did send you all, or at least I sent Tim, who sent it on to you all, the list of items that each department has asked for. And they'll be talking about that in their individual presentations. And as Julie just pointed out, the Shot Spotter initiative is in there, as you may or may not know, and the mayor can explain that, or the police department can explain that better, but it's essentially a program or system that will help us isolate the location of gunfire that occurs within the designated zone or area. And again, they can talk about that.
Where were those fire trucks that we approved?
What's that?
Are those fire trucks in this?
They are.
Next year's?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
part of that's part of it, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are you fully funding the shots, the shot spotters?
I'll let the mayor, and I'll defer to mayor and police on that, because I don't know. The last I was part of the conversation, the chief was going to go back and speak with the company, so I really don't know what the final cost
And
is.
there's also an annual fee for that, correct?
I believe that's the case, and he'll be talking about that in his presentation. We also have, of course, I talked about the police radios and other equipment, and then once again, we will continue a commitment to improving infrastructure and maintenance around town with over $12 million allocated to street, road, and sewer improvements, storm sewer improvements. So that is the 2020 overview. Now, the next thing that we have, I don't know, again, I've got a slide that's missing, but basically, this section is our challenges ahead section. These are the things that we're looking at that are, on the horizon that could be problematic. Things for this budget year, they're fine. We have a balanced budget, and we're in decent shape. We obviously got some revenue we didn't anticipate in the last year, and that's helped bolster our fund balance. But we still do face challenges, and we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be aware that while things may be good this year and maybe the next, we have some potential challenges on the horizon that we need to be aware of and thinking ahead, and we're always looking ahead. We're always trying to plan ahead. So e-commerce, we've talked about that. Based on the latest statistics, e-commerce is taking about 10% of retail right now, and that certainly continues to be on the upswing. We really won't know where that's going to stop until we start to see a plateau, and we have not seen a plateau yet. So it's really hard to predict, and you'll see in a future slide just what I mean when I say that. But from the best of, based on these statistics and our actual collections of sales taxes over the line, we've been able to estimate that the city has lost roughly $40 million over the last 10 or 11 years due to the increase in e-commerce.
Chairman, I saw earlier today that Representative Mike Murphy filed a new bill, hopefully that would, but I believe that would only affect sales within the state of Illinois, to make it so that it's based on where the order is placed from, I think, if I remember reading the bill correctly. But that's not going to affect interstate commerce. The only way to affect interstate is going to be federal level. But Mayor, I definitely recommend that your staff check out what Representative Murphy filed and get on IML, because I think that it would definitely help.
Well, anything like that would help, even if it's from the state, because obviously there are a lot of fulfillment centers here for Amazon and other retailers that have popped up around. So if orders come from that, the bill certainly could help us out, because as it is right now, it's a good segue to my next point. I appreciate that. As you know, the Supreme Court had a ruling over the summer that allowed for the imposition of taxes for companies that don't have what they call a nexus or physical presence in the state of Illinois and in other states. We can now charge them, or we, being the state, can now force them to collect a tax. And in fact, the state did that with its own bill that went into effect October the 1st. And that's expected to bring in an additional $200 million in taxes. Unfortunately for us, it's in the form of a use tax. And we've talked about this before. The majority of use tax, 80%, stays with the state of Illinois. Another chunk goes to Chicago, another chunk goes to some of the transit authorities, and what filters down to the remaining local governments on a per capita basis, unfortunately, isn't very much. So out of that $200 million, we're looking at, if the math works out as expected, we're looking at roughly $300,000. Are we still getting a ringing in here? I'm hearing something. Is everybody okay?
There's an echo.
Okay, it's just an echo, okay. So unfortunately, I mean, we'll take anything that we can get. Every little bit helps, but if we had a true e-commerce sales tax where the tax that's paid made its way back to the communities where it originates, which I think is what Alderman Tylen's talking about with Representative Murphy's bill, that would help a great deal, because we are obviously down millions of dollars. In fact, I think we're probably at the point where we're down, what, 3-4 million a year, maybe more, when you run through the math. So that $300,000 that we're anticipating to get through this Supreme Court ruling, unfortunately, is a drop in a bucket compared to the millions that were down due to the e-commerce phenomenon. I shouldn't call it a phenomenon, I should call it a reality, because that's really what it is. Speaking of sales tax, going back to that, we talked about earlier how over the last, for 2 years, we had sustained decline in sales tax, and you can see it there in this graph, starting in FY16, going down to FY18, and then we've started to see a bit of a rebound. Now, the rebound you see, that line does not include, you'll see the footnote, it does not include the sales tax increase that Alderman Donilon brought up earlier. This is absent that, because we wanted to show you the differential that exists between what a simple continued growth would be at just a conservative 1.5%. I mean, back in the day, as they say, we were looking at growth of 2, 3, even in some instances 3.5%, 4% some years in sales taxes. So we just threw on a conservative, what if 1.5% growth in FY16 on over the next 2 years, and you can see the differential there in the numbers on the left-hand corner. Over 3 years, you're looking at about $10 million. Just if we would have had a conservative growth. And that's what I was alluding to earlier when I talked about sales taxes work very well for the city for a number of years. But now that it's volatile, now that we're running into the uncertainty, now that we're running into periods of decline, it becomes more problematic for us as we're trying to budget going forward, and we're trying to deal with the expense obligations that we have, namely in pensions that I'll be talking about in a minute. This is the chart I alluded to earlier. I talked about the volatility of sales tax, the unpredictability of sales tax. And this is exactly why it's been so hard to predict over the last few years. You can see the line in the middle is basically zero, and it's just all over the board. Some periods it's up, some periods it's down. That area there you see towards the right third of the chart is basically those 2 years where it was down pretty consistently, where we lost money over those last 2 years, which again, the mayor mentioned earlier, just hadn't happened before. It just was unprecedented for the city of Springfield, which is why it really caught everyone, including us, by surprise, because we just, there was nothing in history that has suggested that that might happen. We thought the growth would slow. We were pretty certain that that would happen because we saw it happening with e-commerce. We never thought that we'd see a consistent 2-year decline. And that's the thing that really caused a lot of the issues that we had over the last couple of years. So we're hoping that it has a continued, the growth continues, but even if it does, as you saw from this chart here, we're always going to be below where we should have been, or where we think we should have been or would have been had we just continued to see some consistent growth. Another area to talk about briefly, our telecom tax. Now that was increased last year to help fund library operations, and that certainly has helped bolster those. Certainly this year it's been a big help in making sure that library got adequate funding, but the only thing that I will point out is that the telecom tax was a tax that was declining. If you look at the history, even with the increase, I don't think even in a full year that we will reach the levels achieved in, I think it was fiscal year 12. Yeah, fiscal year 12 at 3.3 million. I don't think we'll achieve those levels even when it was at 4% and now it's at 6% because it is a declining tax. Just one of those things that everybody needs to keep on the radar, that that tax is still declining. It's just been reset higher because of the increase that was passed last year. State of Illinois, we talked about that a couple of years ago. The help balance their own budget. They kept 10% of our income taxes and added a 2% administrative fee to the collection of our local sales taxes. Last year, they cut that income, excuse me? Last year, in their budget, they cut that down. They cut the income tax from 10 to 5% they retained, which is their current fiscal year that they're in right now that ends in June, and they reduced the administrative fee down from 2 to 1.5%. That is what we planned on. We planned on status quo. However, there has been discussions that we've had with others, including the IML, that there's going to be a real push to reduce those things even further and get the income tax retention down to 0, and which is, you know, roughly $600,000 on an annual basis, and to get that sales tax admin fee, if not eliminated because it didn't exist before, at least down to say 1%, which would save us another couple $100,000 a year. And the last thing we're going to talk about, of course, would be the challenges that we face in terms of police and fire pension obligations. We have average growth over that time period from FY4 to 20 of 4.19%. But if you go back and look at our revenue growth, it hasn't been that. So and that's why you'll see in a couple of slides how it's consuming more and more of the budget. And we talked about what's happening on the revenue side. And when people ask me, what are the biggest threats to the Springfield city budget, I always tell them, well, on the revenue side, it's sales tax. On the expense side, it's police and fire pension obligations. There's no doubt in my mind about that because those other things we've worked very hard to control, and they're not really the problem. The problem is that we've got these obligations that are going up $1 million a year, give or take. A couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, it was $1.4 million, just growing each and every year. And what we're finding, as we've talked about, is, again, this chart, it's worth going over again. Back in FY03, you can see on the left all the different things that our property taxes paid for, the library, police and fire pensions, of course, and judgments, and some of our debt service and IMRF pensions. Well, all that's gone. It's all police and fire, 100% and then some. Now, in FY20, we're expecting $22.8 million in property taxes. We have police and fire pension obligations or payment requirements of 23.5. So you're talking about $600,000 to $700,000 more than what we're getting in property taxes. And that's not going away. Again, we have a missing slide. Obviously, we have an old version of the presentation that was sent, but I'll just walk you through this one. I alluded to it earlier. For those of you that can't see it, we have a slide in there that goes back, and in 2011, the corporate fund budget was $109.5 million. The pension payments combined, police and fire at the time, were $16.4 million. That resulted in those obligations being just shy of 15%, 14.98% of the corporate fund budget. And you fast forward to fiscal year 2020, we've got a proposed budget of $125.8 million, 23.5 of that being police and fire pension obligations, and now up to 18.68% of the budget. And for context, I asked staff to go back. I said, well, let's do the same comparison for IMRF. Where are we? And we looked at that just today, and we discovered that at that same time period, it was like 1.75% of the budget, and now it's 2%. Just to put that in a little bit of context of the concerns that we have related to the growth in these pension obligations. And the thing about it is, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, those things we talked about earlier, the health care, the personnel growth, the salary growth, those are things that we have a lot of control, a high degree of control over. These pension payments, we don't. The only two things that we can really do are controlling salary growth, which we've done, all of us collectively, and the number of people on the payroll. Those are the two things that we can do related to pensions, and we've done that. I've showed you the data on it. The rest of it is at the state level. And there is going to be a push this year for the state to do something to provide pension relief. And there's several different bills out there to do that, whether it's consolidation, whether it's lowering the funding ratio or pushing out the ramp. All of that's being discussed. And if that happens, then we'll see some budgetary relief. But if it doesn't happen, we're going to continue to see pensions take more and more of the resources that we have. And they're going to push more things out of the budget. They're going to be over 20%, up to 22%, and eventually 25 or 30% of the budget, depending on what it ends up, you know, as time goes on. So that's really what we're facing. And, you know, to put some of this growth in context, and I wish the slide was up there, but, you know, we had $16.4 million in pension payments for police and fire in 2011. We have 23.5 this year. So you're roughly $7 million or so in additional pension payments. So let's say that you wanted to somehow reduce or negate that growth. How would you do it? By eliminating the budget or eliminating personnel? Well, if you were going to do that, you're looking at going from 2011, it's roughly, what I say, 7 million. You're talking about, based on our average salary and benefits, of eliminating 88 employees. If you go back even further to say 2000, what number did I pull here? 2009. In 2009, the pension obligations were only 12.7 million. They're 23.5 now. That's the equivalent of 135 positions that you would have to eliminate in order to negate that increase over that time period. Just to put it in context, that's what you're looking at. You're talking about the growth that has occurred since 2011. Of that growth from 109 to 125, over 40% of it is just in these two lines, police and fire pension obligations. The rest of it is in healthcare, some of it, and the other big chunk is in salary growth, personnel growth, even though that we've got raises that are in that sub 2% range. You think about it, we have a $54 million salary base. 1% is $540,000, and those are building blocks. So even if you do 1% over 10 years, that's $5 million over 10 years, but it's actually more than that because there's a compounding effect. And that's just 1%. So if you're doing 2%, it's double that. And we're talking about, what, 8, 9 years here? So $7.5, $8 million attributable just to salary growth that really wasn't out of whack with CPI or the economy. But that's the exposure we have when it comes to personnel. So it's all pensions and it's all salary growth. That's really where the budget is increased.
Director, you talk about eliminating positions.
No, I'm just
that's
putting
what you said. That's what you said. Why don't we be more creative and offer different packages when we get new hires, and instead of giving them the same thing that the old employees got, if there's some way that we can offer them a different investment option when they're hired instead of putting them into the same old pension
Right.
system which we are. I mean,
Well,
would that be allowed?
I don't believe that that would be allowed, and I wanted to be clear, we're not suggesting that we need to go out and cut jobs. I mean, we have a balanced budget with no cuts in employees or anything like that. All I was trying to do is put those dollars in context.
I understand that, but you said eliminate the position, so I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, if you wanted to
I wanted to
negate-
be clear, I understood
Yeah.
what your point was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, yes, sir. So that's just kind of put that into context, what we're looking at. That's where the growth is. When people ask me, and I'm telling them, and I've talked to some classes out at UIS, and I've talked to some other groups and individuals, that's what I always tell them. I said, on the expense side, it's the pension obligation. They're growing. And the next slide I'm going to show you, I hope it's in here, because it's the most important slide in the entire presentation. And it's not meant to scare anyone. It's just meant to make everyone aware of what we're facing. And it isn't here, so that's good. So what does this slide mean? And this is what I'm going to leave you with before the summary. What this slide means, if you look at the bottom shaded area, that is our property tax expectation from now over the next 20 years to FY40. The red area above it is the disparity between our property tax expectation revenue and the projected pension, fire and police pension payments that we will have to make according to the latest actuarial projections going out to 20 and 40. So essentially what this slide says is beyond the entirety of every dollar of property tax that we expect to collect in the next 20 years, we will have to come up with an additional $269 million from other revenue sources to meet projected police and fire pension obligations. That's what we're facing. And of course, this is pending changes at the State House, but this assumes no changes in status quo. That is the obstacle, the hurdle, the difficulty, whatever term you want to use, that we're looking at. It's not just property taxes gone, it's $269 million of other services or new revenues or whatever the body decides to do that we will have to come up with in order to meet these mandatory state-required obligations. So with that, in summary, so where are we? We're ending FY19 with a roughly $4 to $4.5 million surplus when it's all said and done, which will increase our fund balance up over $20 million for the second time in the city's history. Even higher than FY16, but second in terms of percentage of the budget. A lot of that came from new and unexpected revenue, which was a good thing. And because of that, and because of the efforts of city officials over the last number of years, we have been able to maintain our status as the lowest tax community of all of our comparable cities. We have introduced, the mayor has introduced an FY 2020 budget that is balanced, no use of fund balance, no transfer from Fund 95, no tax increases, no service or employee cuts. And despite the fact that we're in decent shape right now, certainly some reason for positivity, we need to be cognizant of the road ahead and the challenges that we face in the coming years. And those challenges could come as soon as 2-3 years from now, or they're 5-6 years down the road. But certainly there's no doubt that if things don't change, particularly from the pension side of things at the state level, and certainly if we can't get a better handle on our sales tax issue, we've got some challenges and some difficult decisions that we're going to have to make collectively as a group to make sure that we can continue to provide services to the people of this city. So with that, I am done, and we'll open it up to any questions. No questions? Perfect. Thank you.
I have questions.
Oh, man. Got me all excited there for a minute.
The police and fire contracts, there's a unfunded liability there. How much is that going to be when we do settle those two contracts?
Well, we won't know until we settle them.
But there is a projection, isn't there, on how much we owe that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to project because, I mean, we've got, and I can't really get into discussions on negotiations in an open forum like this. I will tell you that, some of the projections are a bit all over the board. We have allocated funds within the budget that we think should be sufficient to cover settled contracts. I will tell you that those are in the budget. We won't be coming back or shouldn't be coming back to ask for any supplemental or anything in order to meet those obligations.
You do have enough to cover if we settle the fire contract tomorrow, you got enough to cover.
Our expectation actually our expectation is that the fire contract will be settled in part of this year, fiscal year 19, all that retro that's due. It's actually included in our numbers.
Okay.
And that we do know. We can't talk about it until it's public, but we know what those numbers are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Now I think you're just teasing me.
Yeah. Actually, this isn't a question that I have. It's Alderman Hanauer. He called Council Coordinator Tim Griffin. He had a family emergency at the last minute and had to go address that at the hospital. But I wanted to ask this on his behalf. He did send me a message. You notice that throughout the budget in the 1,100 lines, there's a new 1111 line that says merit pool. And could you explain that to the council and what that's all about? And
I can, and then
I
I
can.
can
Increase or not?
I could defer to the mayor, but essentially what that is something that we pulled out of the 1102 lines. It had been used years ago. If you go back, I don't know, Julie, you might know better than I. 11 years ago or so. It had been separated out in the 1111s, and it was folded into the 1102s, and the mayor wanted to pull it back out. It's more of a budget transparency measure. It's not an addition over and above what we would have included otherwise. It's just separating that amount from the 1102s. And the purpose of that, the merit line, and Mayor, if you want to go ahead and touch base on what your thinking is on that, feel free.
Well, I think it's been discussed through the years, individuals getting increases, but the merit pool would be if a director wants to recognize an individual, be an opportunity to provide an incentive to those individuals for doing good quality work. But as Director McCarty had said, it's always been in the budget, but not separated out to show the transparency of it.
Yep. And there are instances that we've come across where, you know, we've had employees who have offers other places for more money that we wanted to keep, and, you know, just a variety of reasons, somebody taking on more work. We've been doing more and more in that, especially with the shared services initiative. And Jeff back there is a prime example of that, where he was the fiscal officer for the library, and he took on the responsibility of OBM as well when our fiscal officer left, and it led to us not having to backfill an entire position. So things of that nature that would have been included in the 1102s are just now been pulled out.
I appreciate that explanation. I think what would be helpful is, could you provide us in the existing budget that we're present in the present fiscal year, what those numbers would be by activity?
By activity?
Right, meaning, like, as I'm looking, I have this page pulled up. It says council activity, corporation council. It shows the 1102 line, and it has an 1111 line. The 1111 line for corporation council is $10,687. I'd like to know what it was in this present year.
What it was in, I'm sorry, I'm not following.
We don't know what, in the fiscal year that we're presently in, we have no way of
19,
knowing.
19,
Right, correct.
Okay, I understand.
Just so that we can have a feel for,
Sure,
is it going
no,
up,
I
is it
understand,
going down,
I
is it the
understand what you're
same?
saying now, okay.
Yeah.
I get it now, sure, we can do that.
And I guess that answers my question, because I want to know the parameters of that. What's the extent that they can use, how much they can use on an individual? Can you tell us that? Is there a limit?
Well, there's a 5% limit for any individual that would have to come back to city council. Under that 5% level, it's up to the purview of the mayor.
Okay. That's
And we get our instructions from him anytime that we want to do something like that, he has to sign off on it.
Have we had to address anything over 5%, Mayor?
I don't think we've had to bring anything, no. I mean,
Okay.
we're cognizant of the 5% level and understand the reason for it, so we've stayed under that.
Now, Bill, the 5% does not include promotion
Does
from
not.
title to title. That's only a raise in the same title.
Yes,
I want
that's
to make
correct.
sure that the public is clear on that.
Yep, that is correct. A promotion is a completely different job, so it's a different situation.